Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Today, we are going to talk about the big three. What is it? Why is it considered the way it is? And does it even really matter? So let's dig in. So what is the big three in astrology? It is not really a technical thing, actually. It's not really, if I'm really analyzing a chart, it's kind of more of a reference, as a quick thing, because the big three is going to represent three components of a chart that very broadly will describe a person. If we think about all of the different planets, as well as the angles in terms of what they represent, if you just want a quick look at somebody to get to know them from a chart or an institution or a political entity or an event, or whatever kind of chart you're looking at, if you just want to get the quick, broad strokes, who is this person, thing, what are they about, right? You don't want to have to sit and look at every single planet and kind of do the, kind of compute things and this and that and this and that. It's easier if you can just kind of look at one or two things that gives you a general idea. And so that's what the big three are going to be. And that's why they're used and kind of thrown out that way. You get a good sense for who someone is just by looking at them. So what are they specifically? Well, they're going to be the ascendant or rising sign. That is the eastern horizon at your time of birth. It is going to change very rapidly. So you'll have all 12 rising signs throughout the course of 24 hours. So rising sign is pretty important. It sets the foundations of the chart, which are called the angles. And then that's also going to dictate the houses that describe a chart. And the houses represent different areas of life. So the angles are quite important, particularly the ascendant, because it sets the house system. Whether it doesn't matter if you're using whole sign, Placidus, Cook, whatever. All the house systems are set by the ascendant. That's the key starting point. So from a descriptive perspective, the ascendant is typically the first part of somebody you're going to see, right? It's always in the first house. The first house is the house of self, the house of kind of our physical appearance, our image. And I always tend to think of it as like the filter or the lens through which we view the world and through which we kind of interact with the world. While we might have planets that are in completely different signs, maybe we have a stellium in our third house or something, but the rising sign itself is going to be kind of the filter through which that stuff kind of outlets. And we can explain that more in a different episode, more in depth. But just know from this kind of more introductory podcast that the rising sign is going to be the lens. It's kind of the starting point of the chart, and it's going to tell you a lot about somebody. This is partially why people don't always identify with their sun signs, right? Somebody might say, "Oh, well, I was born in March. I'm an Aries," but I never felt like an Aries. I always thought I was a little too emotional and too passive. And come to find out, oh, well, maybe it's because they have a Pisces ascendant or a Cancer ascendant, right? And that, like I said, the ascendant is a bit more important because it's kind of the framework for a person. We could think of them like a ship with a crew, with all the different planets representing kind of the different crewmates or whatever, and the captain and stuff like that. Well, the ascendant is essentially the ship itself, right? And it's going to set up with each house kind of representing compartments of the ship. And so that's why it's so important. So you have the ascendant first, right? I tend to also think of it analogy of like an apple. It's the outer layer of the apple, right? It's the first thing you see. You have to go through it to get to anything inside the apple. So it's right there. It's up front. It's the beginning. The next piece of the big three is going to be the sun. The sun represents our conscious personality. It's our ego. It's our sense of identity. It's our sense of will and desire. It's not really desires in the, what do I want to eat today kind of sense, or, I really want to, do this right now. It is in some ways, but it's more of our long-term kind of goals and ambitions. What do we want to be in life? Who do we want to be in life? What do we want to do with ourselves? Right? And how are we actively kind of shining ourselves out in the world? And so the sun is very conscious in that way, right? It's a determined, there's an effort to it that we put in to become that thing, right? We make conscious decisions to be a specific way, to act a certain way, to move towards certain goals. And that's why it's a very conscious thing. The sun does tell us a lot about ourselves. Now, going back to the example, if somebody has, say, an Aries sun, but they feel very emotional, they say they have a Cancer rising, they're not very aggressive. They tend to be very passive. Cancer rising might be a bad example, but maybe a Pisces rising might be a little better. But what they'll find out is the area of life that their sun is in, that's where it really tends to kind of come out. Right, for Cancer, it would be in the 10th house, using whole sign. For Pisces, it would be the 2nd. And so if you looked at that particular area of life, that's where we'd really see the sun kind of show up and take charge. But as a kind of the next layer down to somebody, like I said, if you want to see somebody's kind of conscious motivations, right, which is going to have a huge effect on a lot of stuff going on in their life, you would look to the sun, and that's why we include it as the second part of the big three. Additionally, the sun rules Leo, and wherever Leo is in a chart tends to be where we express, right? Leo is about self-expression. It's about being seen. So if you want to know where a sign, say Sagittarius, where does Sagittarius want to be seen? You look where Leo is in relation, particularly in a whole sign system. It's in the 9th house. What does Sagittarius want to do? It wants to tell everybody what it knows. It wants to share off its belief systems. It wants to teach. And that's also the area where it tends to put the emphasis in terms of its learning, right? It's the 9th house. So that's what we can do. And that's part of why the sun is going to be so important in terms of our personality, because it's what rules our sense of expression based on our rising sign, based on other things. And so that's why it's going to be a major part of who we are and how we want to look at somebody. The last piece of the big three is going to be the moon. The moon represents our subconscious motivations. I think it's the id. I can't remember the term. But it's the subconscious. It's the part underneath that is not easily seen, not really easily understood. It's going to represent our emotions. The moon also obviously represents our mother, just like the sun would represent our father. But in terms of personality, it's a lot more of our needs rather than our wants, right? The sun is kind of how we actively move towards something or move towards, a certain sense of being. Whereas the moon is much more, I innately have these needs, therefore I'm going to operate this way, right? We don't really control the moon. It kind of controls us in a sense. And so that's why I tend to think of the moon, going back to the apple analogy, is kind of like the core. It's the seeds inside the apple, right? It's the very centerpiece. It's very sensitive, right? It's kind of life-giving in a lot of ways. And so the moon is really going to show the subconscious motivations, kind of our emotional needs, our emotional desires, kind of the way we relate to people as well. The moon is very relational in nature. And it's going to show how we tend to emotionally process and our relationship to family and our sense of family values in certain respects in the chart. In the same way the sun rules Leo, the moon rules Cancer. And so Cancer is going to be how we tend to handle a lot of the emotional stuff, emotional processing, as well as nurturing, how we nurture and are nurtured. And so the moon's really going to give us a good sense of that. Now, as we age, as we grow up, right, from a baby to a child, eventually into adulthood, we receive a certain sense of nurturing or misnurturing from our parents, or lack of nurturing, right, from our parents, from our grandparents, from whoever's raising us. And we have certain connections and lack of connections and different things that affect us. And so as a child, we tend to absorb a lot of stuff, a lot more than we kind of used to realize. Modern psychology is really begun to explore and has explored that quite extensively at this point, and how much things affect us as children and what we kind of hold on to. And so a lot of the things we experience as a child, we really hold on and put deep down inside of us. And the moon's going to show a lot of those complexes. And so somebody may act compulsively a certain way, right? But it's not a conscious decision a lot of the times. It's a kind of an emotional trauma, an emotional need that compulsively makes them move or act a certain way. And so this is why, if we can understand the moon as part of the big three, we can see why a person subconsciously is going to act in certain ways. They're kind of emotional needs that's going to push them to move in a certain way, right? Think for a moment, a Gemini moon. What does Gemini moon really want? It wants stability because it doesn't have it, right? It's a very unstable moon. And so Gemini moons people with Gemini moon tend to be very flighty in relationships. Why? Because they're trying to find stability. It's always looking for the strongest option. So if a new option comes along that's stronger, right, it's going to emotionally, hey, that's a necessity for it. So if we can understand things like that, right, with the moon, we can understand kind of the underlying compulsions that a person has. And so this is why combining, you have the ascendant, the sun, and the moon, you get a sense of who the person is, the framework of who they are with the ascendant. The sun's going to show us their conscious motivations, their sense of identity, who they try to kind of become in a lot of ways, as well as where and how kind of the influence on how their ascendant is going to express itself. And then lastly, you have the moon, which is going to be the subconscious motivations. So you get that picture of somebody, and you have a really clear sense of who they are. You don't need to necessarily, now granted, it's helpful to look at the other planets, but you don't need to look at the other planets necessarily to get a good sense of who this person is if you know their conscious, subconscious motivations and the general framework. Does that mean we can ignore the other planets? No, they represent other very important things, right? Mars, sense of action, anger, conflict resolution, things like that. Mercury's going to be communication style, how they think. And so there's other stuff that's important, but it's not central to how somebody operates, right? And so this is why, as astrologers, we tend to like to look at the big three, why it's important. So if you're a beginner, an amateur, a hobbyist, or even a professional, it's always first thing good to know the big three of somebody, because it'll give you a really, really good sense of who they are and what they're about at a very kind of core centralized level. So, hope you appreciated this look at the big three. Hopefully it was informative, and thank you for listening.